Hello and welcome to a new segment of the Bold Black Girls podcast called Bold Black Girl of the Month. Obviously, you see us here. We are women, but this is honoring our Bold Black Girls of the Month. And this month's Bold Black Girl of the Month is Alicia Morgan. So I'm going to read her bio and then we're going to go through some kind of speed round of questions with her to just highlight her leadership skills and just her as a human being. All right. So Alicia Morgan, she earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Science Engineering. First of all, let's just pause for that.
We have a hidden figure here.
I mean, right here, for real. From Tuskegee University and New Mexico State University with a master's degree in industrial engineering. She has worked at Fortune 500 companies such as Lockheed Martin, the Boeing Company, and Raytheon. Her transition into the nonprofit sector was as a program leader for Heart House Dallas, an after-school program serving refugee and immigrant children. In her role at Frontiers of Flight Museum as Vice President of Education and Programs, she reaches over 45,000 students annually through STEM education. She's a TEDx speaker, honoree for the Women of Color in STEM Conference, K-12 Promotion of Education Award, Dallas Millennial Gala STEM Leader of the Year, and a Dallas Business Journal Women in Technology Awards advocate. As a Public Voices Fellow, she has featured articles in many online and print publications. Welcome to the podcast, Alicia Morgan. Yay!
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Excited to be here.
Yay! Yes. First of all, we've been loving Alicia for a while. We connected through the networking streets. Just being everywhere. I feel like me and you met at like a Capital One thing or something the first time.
And then the Run Club.
Run Club. Yes. Yep. So we've been, just kind of in each other's orbits for a while. But today we are going to be honoring you as our Bold Black Girl of the Month. So I'm excited.
Yes. And you're our inaugural Bold Black Girl. So thank you for being the first one. And I think I met you also through networking as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So let's kind of kick it off. We have a few questions that we want to ask you. So number one, I mean, you have an extensive resume. You're a wonderful person, personally and professionally. Mm-hmm. So tell me, who are you striving to be in this world?
Well, that is a great question. So I will have to say I love this topic, bold and being unapologetically yourself. So I want to take it back to middle school. So when I was in middle school, it's this interesting thing. I went to a private school, so a private Catholic school, all Black school. What was interesting is that there was this line. So they would line us up to go to assembly or anything, and they would put the smartest people in the front of the line. So that means you had A's and B's, or, all straight A's. If you were an average student, B, C, they put you in the middle of the line. And if you were below that, they put you at the end of the line. Traumatizer, right?
Right. So I'm over here, like my mouth is open. I'm like,
And so I was at that time in the middle of the line. So my parents always encouraged me to read, and I really applied myself, not because I wanted to be in front of the line, but because I wanted to grow and improve. So when I got to the front of the line, they were like, "What are you doing here?" The other student was like, "This is for the really smart children." I was like, well, I belong here because X, Y, and Z. And I set that as the framework because that's the story of my journey. I have been going in places where, okay, you didn't fit the script. Like when I got into nonprofits, you have to have a PhD, you need to be a teacher, although I'd done substitute teaching and had industry experience. What are you doing here? I have a breadth of knowledge. I'm not taking away from anybody else's experiences. Let me be and walk in my own journey. So that's the story of, the foundation of everything I've done. Like if I have valuable experiences and I can relate, I can go boldly and do my thing. So, wow. And that's what, if you take my story, that's the framework of it. I've always been that way. Like, so I have quit a job before, I have been laid off before, and I've been fired before. So I've experienced all those things that, people say that will kill your career, derail your career. I even had experience with microaggressions. But again, because take it back to middle school, they kind of prepared me. Like, what are you doing here? I belong here like everybody else, and I'm going to boldly step in here. The worst things that they say that could happen to you, I've experienced. So at that point, it gives you a sense of confidence, and you still have, sometimes you're apprehensive, but when like, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, I've experienced these things, so now I can boldly keep going forward. And if someone says I can't do it, oh well.
I like that.
I
like
love that
mentality, because you are going to come across things like that, right? So,
and little did you know how that assembly would prepare you, because I'm like you. I think we had some of the similar experiences with the assembly, and we talked about this before we started the podcast. Yeah. So it's funny you brought it up. But we did that too. Like, you knew who was gifted. They had you in the gifted, who was an average student, and they did that by class.
I don't like that.
I don't like
it either. One bit.
I don't think it's already classifying who you are. And I did not like that either. So I would personally strive to say, I don't want to be in the dumb person's class, because you knew that was the class that was a little off.
And then you're looking down on somebody now.
It's
kind of teaching you to look down, on others.
And that's not diversity.
No, that's classism. I mean, that happens now. If you go to a historically black college versus a PWI, if you work at this company versus this company,
it's always some kind of comparison.
You have to have some strong willpower to say, you know what, I'm going to do this, regardless of what anyone thinks.
And speaking of that, what are some of the things that have influenced you, or like, what are your inspirations that keep you to kind of keeping that mindset and striving? What are you looking to as far as your influences?
Well, my parents and my grandmother were foundation. So my parents would always say, I'll give you a story. I'll speak in stories. That's kind of what I do. So when I was a kid, I was grew up in New Orleans, and I was in a sandwich shop getting a po' boy. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And there were these shoes I wanted. I won't say the shoes because then they were like, oh, that's really old. You must be old.
I want to know.
That's Travel Fox. So I don't know if you ever remember those. But anyway.
Never heard of it.
I thought you were going to say LA Gears or something.
No.
Right.
Gen X. But so I'm looking at these shoes and I really want them. And I tell my dad I want them. And he was like, well, if you need shoes to define you, you're going to have a hard life. If you need all these things outside of yourself. Now, really, he's probably just being cheap. But
parents are good at that. I do it to my kids all the time.
But that was a valuable lesson that, if you want to do something or, you want to be bold, you can't, be like everybody else. And for me, I didn't know that because I'm an introverted personality, but I didn't know that strong sense of wanting to be an individual and march to my own beat of my own drum would be the story of my career. But having that experience and, not having whatever that is the end thing or not being the in crowd. I will always say I was like always the person outside the line. I knew the cool kids and I wasn't in like the non-cool kid. I was like in the middle. Although I'm an only child, I was like the middle person and everything. And so even in my, current role, I am like the middle person, the Gen X. And so there's millennials, there are baby boomers, and then we work with students that are Gen Z. So I'm in the middle with all these generations, like, all right, everybody. So they were just always telling me to, if you want to do something and, whatever you feel the barrier is, where you feel like it's, financial, research. If you're valuable in a situation, you can go in there. So my parents and everyone around me, like my family, they were all like bold, like, if you want to do it, make sure you operate in excellence. And if it's good, like Steve Martin said, it's so good they can't ignore you. Like, and it's kind of like if I take it this way, so I'm not the person that will boldly go in a room and say, hey, this is me, and like, let your reputation speak for yourself. But if you ever gone to a store and you picked up something that you didn't anticipate because it caught your eye, it was very distinct. And so for me, that's how I operate. It's going to be distinct. So when I was interviewing for my role, I was like, if they pick someone and say they have a PhD or have this education experience, all right, this is a flight museum. I'm an aerospace engineer. I have nonprofit experience. I work at Fortune 500 companies. I guarantee you won't find anybody with all those qualifications together. So I consider it a portfolio of distinct work is how I work.
Absolutely.
I love it.
I agree. A portfolio of distinct work. I love it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it and a great way to continue to inspire yourself, while you speak back your qualifications to you.
Right.
That's pretty powerful. I mean, because we, as African Americans in our community, we're kind of taught to like, you need to be twice as smart. You need to do all these things because our parents were really setting us up for kind of the world that we were entering into. And I think so. I like your thought process on that. I know for me, like going to get an MBA was not because I was like, I want to get a master's in business administration. I was like, the jobs that I'm looking at say MBA preferred. So I need to go get one so that that's not a barrier for me to get the opportunity. It had to be something else. You have to find another qualification. So I like that.
Right. And I think that you have a vast experience. And like you said, you have distinct experience. So can you share what adversity did you face on this journey?
So I was mid-career and I had a bad performance review, and I was promoted 1 year. Then the next essentially told like, you're on your way out, performance improvement plan. I was totally devastated, taken aback. I had no idea. I was a very, very good individual contributor, and I was managing capital investment projects, but I wasn't really paying attention to how the, the structure works, social capital, networking, relationships work. And I was doing really good work to myself, but I didn't really like share it. I was waiting for the performance evaluation to show that. So essentially, after all of that, I got through that, and then I was eventually laid off. I told myself I would never be waiting for someone to recognize the work. I would always keep a portfolio of my work. I would always be building relationships. And at the time, I didn't know the term social capital. So there's a lady here in Dallas named Dr. Francois Booker Drew who wrote a book about relationship and social capital. So I learned through that, and I made sure, and one of the key things is, if you've ever been laid off or fired, and if you have all your connections in that company, well, guess what? When you leave, they're gone. Those people usually won't talk to you anymore. So I make sure that I have connections and build relationship in all different industries, and not when I need it, but all of the time.
We are the queens of connection. So that what you're saying, you're just music to our ears and stuff that if people have been listening to us, they know that that's something that we're always talking about is building that network of connection.
We focus so much on human capital and study hard, work hard, you'll be successful. But there becomes a point in your career where, yes, you need to know what you're doing, but it won't matter as much as it did when you're fresh out of college or fresh out of trade school or your entry level job. But nobody really tells you that. And I don't fault our parents or grandparents because they didn't know.
They didn't know.
They taught us what they knew at that time, just like we're doing, what we know. And so, yes.
So true. And speaking of that, kind of going into the next question really is, knowing what you know now. So if you had a 25-year-old self that you can speak back to kind of about these things, I'm assuming that would be some of the things that you would share, but are there other things that you could think of that you would be like, okay, let me let you in on all this stuff that's about to go down. Let me help you prevent, or help you get through this easier.
So when I was 25, I completed my master's degree in industrial engineering. And I had a feeling, and I was working at Boeing in Seattle. So that's the job I quit and moved to Texas. I knew that corporate America in the traditional sense was not right for me, but I didn't know what was right. So I moved to Texas, first Houston with some substitute teaching, then came to Dallas and worked at Raytheon. So I say all that to say is that intuition that tells you that this is not working, but you try to make it work. I listened to that intuition more because, like I told you, I'd been fired before. So the first nonprofit job I had, within 2 weeks, I knew it wasn't right. I tried to make it work, ignored my intuition again, and I was fired. Wasn't surprised. But so I say all that to say is I would tell my twin, when you have that strong sense, there's a difference between being uncomfortable to grow and knowing that it's not working.
Yeah. Man, you're preaching over here, because that's exactly right. And it takes confidence, that's that boldness and confidence in that voice, right? To trust it too, right? So I agree on that. Trusting that gut and having that confidence to say, you know what, this ain't it. It's time to do something else.
Right. And I think I can relate to that. I knew within 2 weeks that a boss that I had been transferred under, I was like, she's not going to be the one for me. And it's not failure. It's just saying, okay, you know what? I need to pivot. This is not for me. Find something else. So you have gone through a lot, ups and downs, seem like, like you say, you've been fired, you've been laid off, you've quit. Tell me, how did you incorporate self-care in between all of that? Because to be fired, that's a lot.
And even and add that into like now. So like how you did it then, but then let's talk about now, because right now is a crazy time. Like, how are you incorporating that in your day-to-day even today? So
there's a book by author Terry Williams that came out in 2008. It's called Black Pain, and it says it only looks like we're not hurting. And so she talks about being a successful PR and having all these top clients and celebrity clients, and she goes through all kind of celebrities that you didn't think would be depressed. But in the book, she says something that still resonates with me, and this is over a decade later, this book, and it's still relevant now, is to sit with your pain. And what that means is, we're always say, I'm going to pray it away, I'm going to go to church or get over it, but you never feel the impact, like getting fired. Like, what's the impact on that? As the person was firing me, I knew it wasn't a good fit, it didn't work, but they wanted to assassinate my character and say that you're a horrible leader, you can't write, you can't. So they wanted to add insult to injury,
tear you down on your way out.
Yeah, I'm like, it didn't work. Simple as that.
Good.
And I had I saw that person a few years later, and one of my friends was like, you want to go up and tell that person, look at me now? I was like, no, it's not worth it. I'm going to use that energy. So sitting with the pain of whatever it is that you're experiencing, whether you need to write it down, journal, whether you need to seek therapy or talk with friends, but you have to sit, you don't just get over it. And you don't always just pray it away either. Like, you really have to figure out, because it's traumatizing. Like, and when something traumatizing happens, it has an effect on your body. You have to figure out, is it affecting my body in any way? Do I need to go to the doctor? Am I always getting sick? Is that a sign of stress? Is my body really telling me something? So taking time out. And even now, like, I can't look at the news every day. I can't read every article, right? It's too much. Too many Zoom calls and too many Microsoft team calls. So you have to take a step out, break, whether it's a Netflix binge or you just want to lounge around all day, listen to music, which I do, all those things.
That was me yesterday.
Yeah. But you really have to sit with the impact of and deal with it, because when I work with students, they always talk about social and emotional learning and adverse childhood experiences. Well, these things are experiences that are trauma, because you will go into a new situation, even if you decide, because I did some consulting before too. Everybody talks about entrepreneurship. So when you're out that waiting for your client to pay you, waiting for your next contract,
anxiety,
all those things, let's stop pretending like it's all glamorous. You got to sit with it and deal with it, because you don't just get over it. So for me, was just, I did an exercise where I drew like a flow chart, and up until now, from the time I was an intern in college to the current, it was 7 stages. So that just made me realize that everything that I've done led up to this stage.
Yeah.
And then whatever's next, will lead, what I've done now will empower me in the future. So
it's all steps. It's all a part of the journey.
But again, that's just sitting with it. Most people don't want to do that. You got to sit with it.
No, they do not.
And it's hard, because that's something that I started doing when I get easily irritated. Okay. Like, that's just how I am. I'm like, And I don't always show it, but I will be
Right.
like inside, I'm like, this is really getting on my nerves. Like, this is getting on my nerves. So I started doing this thing with myself where I'm like, why is this bothering me so much? It's not to point the finger at what is bothering me, because that might not be the problem. It's something that is making me
Right.
it this way or look at it this way. I might be looking at it through the wrong filter, but the sitting is what makes you be able to ask yourself those kind of questions and like wonder like, oh, it's not that this thing is the problem. It's how I'm perceiving it. It's how I'm, but just learning yourself. I think all of that definitely helps with the stress piece and the self-care, as well. Because with all that's going on, I give myself so much grace to just be like, today I'm going to be laying in my bed. That's what I'm doing today.
Same.
Tomorrow I'll get up and do something,
And I think a lot of times we try to avoid it and mask it and, like you say, go out to avoid thinking about it. But like you said, sometimes you do just need to sit in it.
Yeah,
like you sit in the tub, sit in it.
Yeah. So you kind of spoke to the steps, that this is, all a part of the journey. So what are you able to see your next step? What's next for you right now?
So I'm a part of a collective group in Dallas called Power in Action in Dallas. So as a result of the COVID-19 impact on the Black community, it's a group of community leaders coming together, and we're trying to figure out, in each aspect, whether it's education, economic development, health and wellness, and what we can do to help empower the community. So we don't have all the answers now, but we're in communication. And for a personal level, as an advocate, I started out, I would say there's 3 stages I've come to a conclusion. First, I started out inspiring, right? Wanted to tell a story about my story. And a lot of times when you're going through something, you get caught up on, I'm the only person that ever went through this. I just feel so horrible. What did I miss? And then sharing your story, you realize, no, I'm actually not the only person that's gone through this. And then from a position of influence, I was able to empower, like get students internships where they were paid internships, and other women or minorities, getting them opportunities to be compensated, not just a pat on the back. Let's get real. So that's where the real, because a friend of mine always says that you have allies, advocates, and you have defenders. Defenders will go out of their way on the limb for you and will get you compensated. Because I talked about consulting work. Well, there was a time where I was in between jobs, and I did research for the Dallas County Community College District. Well, I had a relationship with the STEM director, who is a PhD, and actually advocated for me to get a position, to the point called me up and said, hey, I think you're a great fit for this. I was like, what do I need to do? Nothing, just say that you want to do it. Didn't even interview for it. So that's what we're talking about. Wow. Defenders. And for me right now, for perspective is I want to learn more about policy and, how that works and how I can possibly get involved in that. So I went from, just inspiring, telling the story, empowering, and now I want to know about the policy, well, I can support the person, writing the legislation or get the info, and just see how the full circle, how everything, gets into place. And that's a lot of things where we're going on now. We're thinking about, the police brutality, education, and health. We can work all in the community, but the legislation is why these things, there's laws that have been in place for a long time, redlining, etc. So
I like that you brought that up. Kind of as we close, I think that is something that we're calling our listeners to do, is making sure that we are all registered to vote. Not only registered, but we are participating in the policies and things, those city council meetings, the school board meetings, all those things that are open to us to hold people accountable for the things that we're putting them in office for. So I think we kind of have stayed away from the politics to a degree. And we'll come back and tell people like, vote, but we don't know what we're voting for, why we're voting for it. So we're going to have to take extra steps to make sure we're educated on these policies and processes that are in place that are making these things happen, that may be unfair. So we're with you on that. Always let us know if there's a way that we can help. Is there a way that people who are listening can find you or follow you?
Okay. So you can, my personal website is aliciammorgan.com, and you can find me on most social media platforms as if you hashtag AM Morgan, you can find me. And also that group I was talking about in Dallas, it's PIA Dallas.org. So it's, Power in Action Dallas. So those are the things. And thank you to the both of you for having me here.
Of course. Thank you for being our bold
coming.
Black
Yes.
Girl of the Month, our first. We'll make sure to put a link to all those things that you mentioned in the show notes. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this new segment. And we will see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.